Hello and welcome. You're watching ET Now. This is a very special telecast we have planned for our viewers right ahead of the 18th G20 summit, which is happening in New Delhi on the 9th and 10th of September. Well, of course, the leadership and India is hosting this particular G20 summit, and of course is the head of G20 for this year. Prime Minister Modi's mantra, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, basically aims at integrating India better with the world, foster economic development, very important issues like MSME and climate change and even women empowerment. Many important issues will be on agenda. But to understand the importance of this G20 summit, which India is hosting in New Delhi in Pragati Maidan, and also what's the importance of it economically, and if you may have observed last few years, the change in world order and India's economic heft is also attracting a lot of attention, be it corporates, be it countries the world over. So to help us understand and put it all in perspective, we have planned this special show with three gentlemen who understand these subjects very well. We are joined by Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, noted economist and historian as well, and also member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Panel. We are also joined by former diplomat and expert on geopolitical and trade related matters, Mr. G. Parthasarathy, and Deloitte, the global consulting company, very active in India and the world. Sanjay Kumar is representing Deloitte in this particular panel discussion. Thank you very much, all three of you joining us on ET Now today. Sanjeev, I'll begin with you so that you can, put it all on the table for all of us to understand, not only from the perspective of the economic ecosystem. A lot of times, we and business channels have conversations which are, narrow, only stock market focused. But this one, we need to understand even as citizens. Our viewers, what is the importance of this hosting the G20 summit this year? Also, especially for India, this summit at a scale never being done before, but the scale at which we are attempting to integrate with the world on trade and commerce, that also have never been done before. So help us understand the importance of it all.
So first of all, it's an opportunity that India has had to show global leadership at a particular juncture in history for both the world and for India. So notice that, we have come out of this COVID crisis because of which the years 20, 21 and 22 were totally disrupted. 22 was a little bit better. And the Indonesia leadership summit did work out, but those 3 years were very disrupted. So as we come out of this crisis, this was the first full year where the G20 was fully engaged and so on. So in that sense, it's a particularly critical point in history. It's also a point in history where clearly the world's geopolitical and economic architecture is obviously being reordered. How they will pan out, it's a different matter, but it's quite visible to all of us that the global architecture is in some ways going through a big shift. So at that point in history, we are getting an opportunity to take leadership. This also is an important point of time for our own economy. So not just seen in decades, but seen in even centuries, we are in some ways clawing back some of our, heft in the world, so to speak. So after a very, very long time, India counts for something in the world economy. And so both of these things are coming together at the time that we are hosting the G20. And so as a result of that, this is a real opportunity for India to help set the global agenda, to show leadership and so on.
Partha, let me come to you then. I want to understand, in the changing world order, especially on the dynamics we've had in the past few years, I would say, even our post-corona diplomacy, it appears that on the world stage, India has arrived. Talk to us about the importance of 18th summit, which we are hosting at G20 in New Delhi, in this backdrop, and what does it mean for India?
Look, the fact of the matter is, till the first decade of this century, all these discussions continuing about the global economy were in European or US forums. Then around 2008, they decided that, look, you can't exclude the Chinese, the Russians, or the major developing countries, because we contribute as much or more than many of the smaller European countries do. And certainly we are comparable, especially China, with the others, and the Russians should have a logical place. So 2008, this meeting, economic summits started. I think it was an American initiative largely, but it's worked, and India came in as one of the, not only a large economy, but an emerging economy. Because you took that period, compared to the rest of the world, our rates of economic growth were higher. And therefore, we were welcome. And also, we had opened out on trade, we were opening out on investments. So we became a part of the global economic cycle. And that's what took us in to what is now called the G20.
Sanjay, you represent Deloitte here on this panel. As somebody who works for a company which is not only doing a lot of work with all shapes and sizes and corporates here in India, but globally as well, I'd like to understand from you, from the trade and commerce point of view, the ambition which India have, the importance of hosting the summit, and also the presidency of G20. Do you think India will be able to integrate better on trade and commerce going forward?
Thanks for having me on this show. India has really upped the scenario on the G20. It has brought many more things. It's not only from a political side point of view, but also from an economic point of view. And India, at the moment, the growth, India, everybody is looking towards India. So it's a chance for India to lift itself and try and acquire certain position whereby it can start setting certain economic issues, a kind of leadership role on that. Trade and investment are the need for India and also for the world actually. And companies, not only domestic companies, but also international companies, would want a lot more understanding and leadership by a country to take forward the trade. And this is not only about inward investment in India, but it's also setting a market access opportunities, giving opportunities to LDCs, and in that Africa is one such example, giving opportunities to MSMEs as an industry segment, and giving opportunities to gender, which is basically women. So it's about diversity. It is about setting certain equity and certain about inclusion. So it is a larger piece that India is looking for. We are also hearing in this context, as you would see in various news reports and interaction with some of the world, corporate leaders, they feel that India, as it grows better, it will have more responsible behavior towards setting a new international order. And that brings a new dimension to the expectations that people have from the country. So it is not only about G20, but it is about, it's a chance for the India to set itself and assume certain position which it has not ever, it never had so far. So it's a very good opportunity, and it's an opportunity by which India could leverage its presidency to not only upgrade itself, up its ante, but it's also setting a new world order. in the coming future.
Sanjeev, I'd like to build upon that point a little more, which you just ended the note on. India is getting back to the heft it once enjoyed. Many thousands of centuries back, actually, I would say, India was almost 25 to 30% of the world GDP. And then subsequently, we lost our ground economically. But do you think that in the last 10 years, looking at the reforms which have been done, the way every MNC wants to set up base in India, in fact, McKinsey has even called this a century, India's century. Even our own Prime Minister has quoted that McKinsey report before. Do you think in the years to come, this economic momentum will only, which is more structural and durable, and only gather momentum from here on?
Well, it depends on how we keep investing into making it durable. I mean, nothing is God given. We have to keep working at it. So, let's take, for example, you said MNCs and all these people are coming, but, we are truly going through a renaissance, like the Europeans went through a renaissance in the 1500s. We are going through a similar renaissance. Look at every field of human endeavor, and suddenly Indians matter. We are even managing to throw javelins further than everybody else. Who knew that a few years ago, right? We are managing to land on the moon. We are doing things which we simply wouldn't have imagined doing a few years ago. So this sudden growth in confidence is also happening at a time which we discussed earlier, when the rest of the world is also coming unstuck in many ways. I mean, it's quite obvious that Western dominance is in deep decline. It is quite obvious that China's place in the world is now being questioned in various ways, and it has domestic problems as well. So in some ways, our renaissance is happening at this certain point in history. Now, this does not mean that, okay, our demographics is good and so we will just grow. We got here by investing heavily into, reforms and multiple things, by working hard, by holding together as a country and pulling in the same direction. So this momentum has to be very carefully protected and invested into. Otherwise, yet again, we'll say, we snatched defeat from the mouth of victory. So we don't want that to happen. So this requires that we as a country need to pull in the same direction, but certainly is the case that this is a fantastic opportunity.
Partha, so going forward with that ambition in mind, how should India actually engage better with the world on trade and commerce in order to boost our share in world trade? Because eventually we want to, on services part we are doing well, but on merchandise export, how can India improve our share as far as the global trade is concerned?
Well, there are several factors which go into this. I mean, things happen strangely. For example, with the problems which Russia started encountering, we certainly refused to have it. So it's a friendly country. We refused to have sanctions. And therefore, our oil trade with Russia was shot up. We got to trade at oil at commendable, affordable prices, which was a boon in today's world for economic development. And so it's also how you play your diplomacy. We certainly did that, but the fact of the matter is that the OECD countries led by the US really dominate the world, and of course China. And while the Europeans and the US are predictable, I can't say the same about China, which is not only unpredictable, but it sometimes becomes unfriendly.
Sanjay, up till now we've seen that our biggest trade partners have been US and also China. But we want to integrate with the world, improve our share of merchandise exports. Be it a lot of PLIs have also been given in manufacturing of various kinds of components, be it electronic, chemicals, textile, toys, capital goods, pharma. How do you think we are faring on that front, and G20 agenda setting will help us do that better going forward?
You said it right. India has been into the services trade and has established itself in some manner. It's also wanting to deepen the services trade. And now that the AI and fintech, they are also important, and India would make a mark. But coming to the merchandise trade, we do know that many people want to come here. Many companies are setting up, and largely because of the infrastructure development that the country has seen over the last 3-4 years. But still, the merchandise trade as part of the global trade is very low. And on that, India would want to move into the second tier. On that, it's trying to bring the aspect of being a trusted, partner. And this goes back to what happened a few years ago when, because of the pandemic, the overall supply chain system just broke down. India, with its democracy, with a stability and policy stability, I would include in that, is trying to bring more resilience and inclusiveness to make sure that the supply chain breakdown that had.
Sanjeev, so before we wrap up, I would like to understand from you that what would be the key message that India needs to send out from this mantle so that India is taken much more seriously going forward across the globe?
So I don't want to comment on what will be there in the communique. Obviously, that you will have to wait for a few more days. But let me say that India is, has clearly shown that we can play on the global agenda. We have raised many issues which are of interest to the global south. And of course, we have the advantage that we'll be handing over to another large developing country, Brazil. So in that sense, this agenda is not just our year and that's the end of it. We can pass it on to another country that shares many of those same views. So in this way, first of all, the reordering of the global architecture towards the global south is something that we have now set in motion and will be carried forward into the future. Of course, an important part of this is that there are many areas in which we have articulated views from an Indian perspective. For example, we have, I think, managed to convince much of the world that you need a global way of managing, for example, cryptocurrencies. We have talked about how when we think about health, we can't think in terms of narrow pharmaceutical sense. We need to take a holistic view of health, which includes, by the way, accepting traditional systems of health management as well. There are many, many small and large things that you can sort of talk about. We have, for example, created a new stream within G20 to look after the interests of startups. So there is an entire agenda that we have set in motion. Now, of course, G20 is a club, and there are 19 other members who have to be willing to accept these in their own way. So we have taken cognizance. I mean, leadership isn't just throwing down your own view. It's about taking everybody along.
Partha, what about you? What would you say about the key messaging India needs to send out from this particular mantle and should take best advantage of this particular occasion?
Look, I think the message to the world is very clear that first we need to cooperate, open out and discuss with each other how best we can move ahead. And therefore, to that extent, this G20 is a laudable initiative because it brings in the largest economies in the world. It also brings in countries with whom, even before the conference, we can have a dialogue as to how we can collectively move things forward. And it has served us well. Let's face it, we are amongst the better equipped developing countries in the world. Our rates of growth compare favorably with virtually everybody else, or certainly better than everybody else. So I think India goes in with new confidence. But also I think one thing good we have done is sort of focusing on bilaterals with these members, particularly the United States, which gets us a better deal, as we are getting now semiconductors from the US, as a result of this interaction globally with the US and taking it forward bilaterally.
Sanjay, in your mind, what are the areas of scope, apart from the agenda which is stated, where you see a lot of scope for India to make progress in terms of MSME, in terms of sectors, if we take certain sectors into account, renewables, where even our Jan Dhan has helped us make a lot of inroads in rural credit, etc. But where technology can play a role, be it manufacturing or otherwise, what would you say the areas where perhaps the world can look at India as a reliable trade partner?
I mean, some of the services sector, of course, needs more deepening. Just to give you an example, as on date, I think 54% of the GCC, Global Capability Centers, are situated in India. But suppose we make certain policy changes, and in that the overall markup that is normally adduced to India's operation, it also gets reduced a little bit, and India creates a certain amount of concession that at the moment it has looked at 15% or 17% or 18%, which just reduces maybe 70% of the global capability centers come to India. We also need in that setting up of the regional headquarters so that treasury functions and other things start happening in India. IFSC is one such aggressive intent that India has set up, particularly on the services sector. And, in that aircraft leasing or other treasury functions could also start building a lot more capability in India. Coming to the, and this is not alone, I'm just giving few examples on the services, but there will be more, including the R&D as services, because that also is looking for some help. And I think government is looking at certain policy, instruments such as.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Sanjeev, Sanjay, Partha, all three of you, to help us understand the importance of 18th G20 summit and India's hosting it, and how India can actually become a better trade partner for the rest of the world, engage better on important areas, and of course continue on the path of reforms and the massive economic momentum it has gained in the last few years. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today.